Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Rose. You sound very muffled. Um, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, I
I
can.
can hear you.
Okay, okay, good, good. How are you? How are you, Rowan? How are you, Melody? How are you, Rose? Um, Daniela and everyone, Matthews. I see only five people here, and Uh, I believe you must have all received the email. I sent out the email almost twice. Yeah, Matthews, yeah. Go ahead. Matthews, yeah, go ahead. I see your microphone. I see your microphone, but I don't hear anything. Um, Matthews, if you have a question, check your microphone setting, right? Let's see. Uh, in today's forum, I see only I see only five people. So and I see five here. So this numbers match. So this is all. What happened to the rest of? So
To be honest, Professor, I only saw I happened to check Blackboard and that's where I saw it. I didn't see an email.
oh, that's weird. Um, you see, you need to look into the spam folder because when I send it out, I had it in my junk folder, right? So it's like I already deleted it, but it comes to the junk folder. So it's like
Maybe that was the issue other people may have had. Maybe that's why it's low attendance. Maybe they're at the
right.
actual classroom.
You see, it went out twice. The first one at 3:22 a.m. The other one, no, they were more apart. Like that's not. So this is another class. This one, yeah, FNB 100, section 1500. You see, that went out at 3:22, and another one. Maybe that's still the other one is still in the junk mail folder. It's in junk mail. Yeah, it's there. So the first one went out at 12:45 a.m. The second one went out like that. But but if you use if this is the reason why I'm telling you to uh, in the announcement, you see this is the reason I want you, I don't want you to send email to my VMCC account, because it goes into the junk mail folder. And if you don't look into the junk mail or spam mail folder, but if you with BMCC with Blackboard, I think you are supposed to by default it would be the BMCC email, unless you uh, select your uh, outside email as the default email, right? Uh, Now but if you check, yeah, it's important to check the, make a habit. It's important to make a habit of routinely, at least, periodically check the announcements, right? Because if you don't check, if you don't meticulously check your email, and if your default email is BMCC email, you wouldn't find it. Uh, so here it is. Yeah, someone found going online today. Okay. So, well, 5 people, and doesn't matter. Yeah, I guess some people are starting to realize. I see 6 people, 6 people here. Yeah, so I have 6 here. All right, so hopefully the rest of the class will join us soon. All righty. Okay, so the last time, right? In our last class, we were talking about the nominal interest rate versus real interest rate, I believe. So we were talking about what causes inflation. I said there are 2 types of inflation: demand pull and first of all, nominal versus real. Nominal interest rate minus inflation is real interest rate, right? I believe, I talked about this in the last class. Nominal interest rate is the stated interest rate. That's the rate that the bank quoted. And the inflation, of course, inflation is inflation. And there are 3 possibilities, right? Nominal rate can be either greater than inflation, it can be equal to inflation, or it can be less than inflation. And so under each scenario, right, the real interest rate is positive. In this case, real interest rate is just 0. Real interest rate is negative in this case, right? And I must, this is one thing, in in-person class, I can't exactly recall where we were exactly, or uh, what I talked about exactly. I mean, I may have talked about it or may not, uh, but I must have discussed the implication of real interest rate, right? So, does anyone remember uh, if I gave you the example of Coke, right? The price of Coke a year ago at
Yes, I
time
did.
zero, I did, right? $1 a year later, price of Coke is now $1.10, and that means inflation was 10%, right? In that case, so. Uh, And I said inflation is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because from the borrower's perspective, right? From the borrower's perspective, uh, inflation makes the burden much lighter, right? If you borrowed $10,000 a year ago, and when you pay back, if the you pay back $11,000, so nominally that's $11,000. But if there has been 10% inflation, it's just like paying back only $10,000. So the burden is a lot lighter. So this is why this is a good time for good news for borrowers to pay back. And if you are expecting inflation, this is the that would be an incentive to increase borrowing. But again, borrowing doesn't mean necessarily a bad thing. I mean, if the businesses borrow, right, it's mainly to expand their production capacity. Expanding the production capacity means the if on average every producer increases borrowing and expand their production capacity, then overall the supply capacity of the economy grows, right? So the economy is economy grows, economy, because economy's supply capacity grows by let's say 10%. That increases the production level by 10% and output by 10%. If output is greater by 10%, that means on average everybody's income grows up by 10%, right? So uh, and I talked about demand pull. Oh, oops. So inflation is not necessarily a bad thing, because a moderate inflation is the sign of a vibrant economy, right? A moderate inflation, uh, not accelerated high inflation. Now, inflation and I mean the instead of interest rate here, right? Let's just replace this. Let's just replace R I interest rate by uh, G growth rate, right? Let's say growth rate prime. That's real growth rate prime. Um, the economic growth rate. So economic growth rate means, what is economic growth rate? It's the growth rate in GDP, change in GDP over change in GDP at time zero, right? That's growth rate, right? Now think about it. Um, the growth rate can be greater than inflation, or equal to inflation or less than inflation. If the growth rate, so this G is nominal growth rate. If the nominal growth rate is, greater than inflation, then you still have positive real growth, right? Think about it. If the economic growth rate is 15%, inflation is 10%, right? The real growth rate is still positive 5%, right? On the and if the nominal growth rate of the economy is 10%, inflation 10%, right? Real growth rate is 0%. And on the contrary, if the economic growth rate is 5%, inflation is 10%, the real growth rate is -5, right? So think about it. Economic growth rate is basically an average, economic growth rate is the average growth rate in income. It's GDP. If GDP grew 5% or 10%, 15%, that means on average, everybody's income grew by, 10% or 15%, 5%, right? Is closely related with your paycheck, right? If the economy grew on average 10%, that means your paycheck grew by 10% on average. Of course, the GDP does, is not only, paycheck, right? It's not only, but roughly you can, because the output of the economy is the income unto itself, right? If you it's pretty much the there's a parallel there, right? So and we are currently we are in this situation. We are in this situation, right? Why? You may have heard that you may have heard January to January, year on year inflation. So you must have heard that inflation in January was 7.5%. What does that mean? From January 2021, right, year on year, to January 2022, the inflation has been 7.5%, right? On the other hand, I mean, this has to be, what a coincidence. This must, as if, somebody has designed it this way. What about the wages? How much did the wages, in other words, income, your income, how much did wages grow during the same period? 5.7%. These numbers are flipped, right? 7.5, 5.7. So think about it. If wages are not keeping up with inflation, right? Obviously, people will cry out inflation. Everybody will cry out inflation, everything, because your effective real growth in your income is negative then, right? It's the same idea, just like, real interest rate and, the relationship between, real interest rate and nominal interest rate and inflation, just like that. Nominal wages, real wages, inflation, nominal GDP, inflation, real GDP, right? So think about it. If this is the case, nobody will cry out. Nobody will cry out inflation. Nobody will cry out inflation. If this is the case, right? If this is the case, still, you're not better off. In this case, you're clearly better off, right? If this is the case, you're clearly better off. Nobody will cry out inflation. But if this is the case, you are no better off, but you're no worse off than last year. So nobody will cry out, probably not complain that much. But if this is the case, everybody will cry out inflation, right? So as long as economic growth rate is greater than inflation, no problem. I mean, we can have like 5% inflation, or 6% inflation, but 6% inflation would not be a problem if the wages, right, which is part of the GDP, right? If the wages, if the economic growth rate is greater than 6%, right? So anyway, so there's no absolute line to draw between high inflation and moderate inflation, but generally moderate inflation is between 2 to 3%, 2 to 3%, because as I said, inflation is inevitable in a growing economy. If the economy is growing, right, inflation will there will always be an inflation. If the economy is growing, there will always be an inflation, right? As I said, because inflation is the caused by strong demand. Inflation is caused by strong demand, right? It's caused, and the strong demand pushes up the price. Okay. And so without without demand, economy is as good as dead, right? So generally, moderate inflation, which is a good inflation, is the result of it's called demand pull, because due to strong demand. It's called demand pull inflation. Demand pull means we all know this is a stylized macroeconomics. Quantity, right? In macroeconomics, this is Y actually. Y represents output or income, right? And this is price level. We all know demand curve. This is demand. Slopes downward. Supply curve slopes upward, right? And think about it. If the demand is strong, what does that mean? And currently, and we all know currently, this is the equilibrium currently at time zero, right? And this is the output output level at time zero, and this is the price level. This is the price level at time zero, right? And then if the demand is strong, what does that mean? That means at every price level, right? At every price level, there are more demand, more quantity demanded, right? So that means demand curve shifts out, demand curve will have to shift out, right? Think about it. That means at every price level, you have more demand, right? Even at P0, the output level, even at P0, so at every at, at every price level you have, right, as opposed to right, this will be the quantity 0 prime, right? But the new equilibrium will be here. Call it equilibrium 1, and then at that equilibrium, right? This is the equilibrium at output level at time at equilibrium 1, and then this is the new price level at new equilibrium. So when with the strong demand, the economy expands. This means the economy is expanding. This means, because price is higher, everything is more expensive, right? Everything is more expensive. But there is more of everything. There is more of everything, right? You have, more income, so you can buy more goods, and the economy is supporting that more demand. So think about it. This movement from P1 to P0, that's change in P, right? Change in P. And this movement is change in Q, right? And then if you divide, change in price by price at time 0, that's basically, inflation. That's percentage, right? Change in price divided by original price, that will give you basically a growth rate in price. So that's inflation, basically, right? That's inflation. And then if you divide change in Q by Q0, right? If you divide change in Q by Q0, that's percentage growth in output, percentage growth in output. So this is what? This is growth rate. This is the growth rate. So think about it. As long as growth rate is greater than inflation, in other words, price went up by 5%, but the income went up by 10%, right? There will be nobody will, cry it out. Nobody will cry out. This is called demand pull, because strong demand pull the price level. It pulled the price level, right? It pulled the inflation. On the other hand, I need to draw this again because erasing it will be more difficult. Will take more time. And on the other hand, let's think about it. So we have demand, we have supply, And the original of course, this is the original equilibrium right here. And this is quantity. The output level at original equilibrium, price level at original equilibrium, and uh, cost push. That means when everything becomes more expensive, when initially the input cost, um, supply input cost, like labor, capital, and raw material, things like these become input costs become more expensive. Then what happens? Supply curve will shift in. S prime. Supply curve will shift in. Um, it's because it becomes more less and less profitable, right? When input cost goes up, right? Think about it. When input cost, like raw material, labor, capital, input cost goes up, the more you make, the more you make, the profit will get it will become less profitable. So they cut down on the suppliers cut down on production, right? The producers cut down on production. Um, you might wonder, oh, if wages go up, input cost goes up. Factors of production, like factors of production is basically capital, labor, raw material, right? Which is called natural resource, right? Natural resource. If these things go up, can't they? Don't they just charge higher price? Can't they just charge higher price? No, they can't. I mean, why? Um, well, if they are, if they do that, they are just transferring that cost to the consumers, right? They are transferring that cost, increasing cost, and they are increasing, that they just transfer that increase in cost to the consumers, right? But then obviously we know the higher the price, the demand will go down. Of course, demand isn't moving here. The demand in the short run, demand is relatively uh, steady. Um, and I believe someone asked this question, in the last class, uh, actually after the class. Because supply and I made distinction between the two. That the supply, the physical limitations of the supply. I mean, there's a that's the nature of there's a physical nature in supply. You have to but by the way, you cannot just hike up the price because, first of all, because of law of demand. But in the short run, we're not even assuming the demand is changing in the short run. Demand schedule is still the same. But why? Um, you have think about it. You have competition. Unless all the competitors raise the price, you cannot just raise the price. You cannot just raise your price, because if you raise your price, you lose business to your competitors. right? You lose business to competitors. So you cannot just single-handedly raise price. And especially if you're in a very competitive industry, uh, that is the case. And uh, if all the producers in the industry raise the price, then by then the demand will also uh, shrink. Demand will shift in as well. Demand will, with higher price, obviously, the uh, uh, demand schedule will shift as well. Now, the second, also, if you are a monopoly, let's say you're not in a competitive industry, you are a monopoly. Even if you're a monopoly, uh, the higher the price, right, uh, the lower the demand. That goes without saying. The higher the price, the lower the demand. Um, and that's exactly what you will find here. So as everything input cost gets higher, uh, the supply, because it becomes less profitable, the supply schedule will shift in. In other words, they produce and supply less at every price level. So there will be a clearly you will have a new equilibrium here. Uh, at the new equilibrium, the price is higher, but look, there is less of everything. There is less of everything. In other words, you're stuck with a higher price. Change in price is, clearly positive, right? Uh, change in price is positive. However, price went up, uh, but the change in output level is negative, right? Change in output level is negative. So this is the worst case scenario. I mean, in this, and this is called, cost push inflation. Cost push inflation, right? Now think about it. In this case, this is demand pull. And at least in this case, price is higher, but there are more of everything. There are more of everything, especially the growth rate, the change in output over change in quantity over old quantity, right? Quantity at time zero. If this is greater than, this is economic growth rate, basically. If this is greater than inflation, it's wonderful, right? Inflation is not a bad thing in this case. However, if this is the case, cost push, uh, price is higher than before, but there is less of everything. Less of everything. This is not a good. This is not a good scenario. This is clearly a worst case scenario, right? You don't want an economy where everything is more expensive, but there is less of everything, right? That's not what you want. Uh, but we are not, as I said last time, we're not uh, like this. We currently the inflation is like both demand pull and cost push, happening at the same time. There's some element of cost push and some element of demand pull. And if they're happening all at the same time, exactly by the same magnitude, it will cancel out. Uh, but not exactly like that. Currently, as I said, wage growth rate is inflation is greater than wage growth rate, so everybody is crying out inflation. Um, all right. So any questions so far? Any questions? Any questions? No? I see only, look, what happened? 7 people, and let's see. I see 10 people. What happened to, all right. Okay, I hope you have a good connection. So that explains a lot about the relationship between nominal interest rate and inflation and real interest rate. So next question is, in who determines the interest rate? Who? Once again, that's not a very that's not a very smart question, because answer to that question is always clear. Uh, Interest rate in a free market economy, everything is determined by demand and supply, right? It's basically the market force. So if you think about it, and I wonder if you ever thought of it this way, but interest rate is also a kind of price. And I explained it also in my main lecture videos. Interest rate is the price for, anybody can answer this. Interest rate is the price for what? Interest rate is the price for? Anyone? Can anyone answer this question? Interest rate is the price for?
Is it loaning money?
Loaning money?
Yeah.
No. If you're lending money, I mean, price is what you pay.
Borrowing.
If you're borrowing money, yes. Interest rate is the price for borrowing money. Yeah. Rowan, you got, I'll give you 0.5 for that. Yes, interest rate is the price for borrowing money. So for any price, right? Price is determined by demand and supply. So the same goes for, it's the same thing for interest rate. It's, interest rate is the price for borrowing money. So demand and supply. It's determined by demand and supply, right? That's the obvious answer. But then that's, but there is benchmark interest rate, something called benchmark interest rate. What is that? Although the actual interest rate is eventually the result of the market mechanism, but there is a benchmark interest rate, which is, in the U.S. it is called Fed funds rate. Okay, Fed funds rate. Now, Fed funds rate is the short for Federal Funds Market Rate. Okay. So what's a federal funds market? Federal funds market is the market where commercial banks, or commercial or retail banks borrow from and lend money to each other, right? So the name because the name is Federal Funds Market Rate, Fed Funds Rate, people often think, people are prone to mistake it as Federal Reserve. No, Fed funds market is not Federal Reserve. Fed funds market is just a just an online, or online market, online exchange where commercial banks borrow from each other. Okay. So think about it. If it is the market for commercial banks, then the rate has to be the rock bottom. The rate has to be the rock bottom rate. Rock bottom. In other words, because it's within between the lenders and borrowers within the same industry, because it's between the commercial banks, the rate has to be the most rock bottom, right? So that's why it is called benchmark rate. Okay, currently Fed funds rate is currently 0.0, right? Right, 0 to 0.5%. And it's been I wonder if I talked about this last time, but I believe I did. It's been like this since 2008. Of course, there were times when the rate was slightly going up or down. So look, from 2008, since 2008, prior to 2008, 2007, 2006, like 2005, it was around 1.25. 2005, it was around 1.25. But 2006, it went up to 4.25. And then 2007, 5.25. And then 2008, it dropped to like 0.25. And then 2018, right? It was almost 2.5, but back to 0.25 again. But a lot of times what you hear is Federal Reserve is going to raise the short-term interest rate, which means Fed funds rate, to in March. They are going to raise it in March. So it sounds like Federal Reserve is changing or determining the Fed funds rate. Actually, they don't. As I said, it's the market mechanism that actually changes it. But what Federal Reserve does is Federal Reserve just sets the target rate. Target range for the Fed funds rate. So look, this is a range, right? Between 0 and 0.25. Actual market rate would be somewhere. I mean, every day will be different, right? Every day will be different. It is because every day demand and supply for federal funds, will be different, right? So what they do is just set the target, and through the market mechanism, they try to bring it within this range through the market mechanism, right? So even if the Fed funds rate is like 0.25%, as I said, that's only between the commercial banks. nobody can borrow at 0.25%, right? No individual or no institutions can borrow other than it's only the banks. So if you are the borrower and as an individual, right, as just an individual, the best interest rate you can get if you borrow, it's called prime rate. Okay, prime rate is conventionally prime rate is about 3% above the Fed funds rate. 3%. So currently Fed funds rate is 0.25, right? So if you have excellent credit score, you can borrow at prime rate, and then the rate will be 3.25 or 3.5, right? Now, so obviously, as your credit score goes down, right? Your default risk goes up. From the lender's point of view, your default risk goes up, so they will have to charge higher interest rate, right? Now, the interest rate is very important from macroeconomic perspective. I've been talking about this a lot because if the lower the interest rate, the higher the borrowing, right? The lower the interest rate. If interest rate goes down, borrowing goes up, and you might attach a stigma to borrowing, but this is especially especially true in Japan, because and in South Korea, they average citizens in these countries, Japan, they put a stigma on borrowing. But borrowing for a productive purpose is what gives life to economy. Think about it. The borrowing I'm talking about is the business borrowing, right? The borrowing I'm talking about is the business borrowing. So when businesses borrow, it's for a productive purpose. In other words, investing in their own expansion, for expanding their production capacity. So if they expand their production capacity, that would include, hiring more workers, hiring more, capital. In other words, when I say capital, it means physical capital, right? Physical capital, such as, plant and equipment, right? In other words, you will need to expand the production capacity. You will need to build a new plant. If you build a new plant, that gives a job to a construction company, right? And a construction company hires workers. So it creates, jobs, right? And when the project is over and the construction is done, then you will install production equipment in the plant. So this gives, jobs to the companies that make production equipment, and then the companies that make production equipment will hire more workers and more material. This gives a rise. This feeds back into the economy. This gives a rise to the new job creation, and once the plant is finished, then you will hire workers to run the new facility. So it creates jobs. So in other words, there's a ripple effect, a feedback loop, right? Uh, that creates positive uh, ripple effect into the economy, right? So business borrowing is very important. Also, household borrowing is important too. For example, most households borrow to buy a house, and then that's directly related to the uh, construction industry. Not only construction, but household appliances. Companies that, with more homes built, um, they will need to uh, they will need to put refrigerators, ovens, and things like appliances into homes, right? Microwaves, uh, washing machines, So it has a feedback, a positive feedback into the economy. Um, so when borrowing goes up throughout the economy, there will be more money supply, and with more money supply, right? More people have jobs. There's more job creation. Obviously, uh, the output of the economy goes up. That Y stands for output as well as income. And I said, output is the income unto itself. Output of the uh, economy is income unto that economy. So that is GDP. GDP goes up. And uh, exactly the mirror image. If interest rate goes up, borrowing gets this borrowing gets depressed or discouraged, and then money supply goes down throughout the economy, so output goes down, right? So I think it's 4 o'clock, so we have to take a break. Let's take a 10-minute break, and uh, we'll come back. Uh, we'll come back in 10 minutes, okay? All righty. Uh, so stop sharing. And All right, we're back. We're back. So let's see. I looks like I, I have 8 people still there. Let's see what happened in the meantime. I see at least 12 people. 12 people. In the in today's forum, and I see only okay. 8 people. Um, I see some people have some connection issues, um, but this session is being recorded, right? So if you had connection, intermittent connections, then later you can find uh, the recording of this live session later in the topics folder. Okay, so Melody, I saw your hand was raised. Melody, go ahead, Melody. Did you have a question? No? Okay, I would. Yeah, Daniela, go ahead. Daniela.
Hello.
Yeah, there's a lot of echo and laughter. Daniela, go ahead.
Yes. I can't hear myself.
No, no, what's going on? You know. All right. I'll just have to hope that your connection status gets better. And please, bear in mind this is a class, so please, don't mix your personal business with the class. Now, so where was I? So, as I said, the Federal Reserve sets the target range for the Fed funds rate. And once again, the actual Fed funds market rate is determined by demand and supply, but the target rate is set by the Federal Reserve. And then the Federal Reserve uh, works through the market mechanism to bring the actual market rate within the range of the target rate, within the target rate range. Okay, that mechanism is called open market operation. Open market operation. And so we need to define what market we're talking about. Of course, open market means the market is open to anybody. Okay, and what market then? It's bond market. So we need to understand what bond is. Okay. Um, but first, open to everybody means uh, any bond buyer, right? Any bond investor, any bond buyer, uh, uh, individual or institutional, institutional, mostly institutional, uh, domestic or foreign, right? So any domestic or foreign individual or institutional investor can participate in the U.S. Bond market, right? Uh, Basically, on the buy side, right? Because as an investor, right, on the sell side, so who's selling bond, or rather who's issuing bond? Uh, uh, Companies, generally companies, but U.S. government, the biggest issuer of the bond is the U.S. federal government, and then corporations, and then municipal governments. So in the U.S. bond market, uh, bond issuers are generally bond issuers are U.S. federal government and U.S. municipal governments and corporations, domestic corporations, but sometimes there are foreign corporations uh, selling bonds in the U.S. bond market as well. But mainly it's U.S. corporations, right? So once again, we're talking about the bond. Why are we talking about the bond? Because we need to talk about the open market operation. And the open market operation refers to the bond market operation, open bond market operation. And why? Because that's how the Federal Reserve changes affects the Fed funds rate. Not only Fed funds rate, but all the interest rates, short-term, long-term interest rates in general. So bond is what? Bond is a standardized debt instrument. Bond is a standardized debt instrument. Standardized means some features are standardized. So what features? The first, face value or par value or maturity value of the bond is $1,000. In other words, each bond has a face value of $1,000. And as an investor, if you are buying bonds, you don't pay 1,000. I mean, the selling price of the bond can be less than 1,000 or more than 1,000, right? So there's a difference between the selling price and the face value. Okay. And they all have, because it's borrowing, basically, companies sell bonds to borrow money, borrow capital. So they pay interest, right? The interest on the bond is called coupon rate. Coupon, right? So if the coupon rate is 10%, that means they pay 10% of face value, 10% of 1,000, the face value, right? Annually. So 10% of the face value will be $100. So $100 annually during the life of the bond or the maturity of the bond, right? I told you bond is a debt instrument. So in other words, it's borrowing, right? And for any borrowing has maturity, right? There is no borrowing without maturity. I mean, the borrowing cannot be endless. So if the maturity is 10 years, right, then with the coupon rate of 10%, and that means 10% of the face value, 100, will be paid annually as interest. But actually, they pay it twice a year. In other words, the interest is semi-annual. Okay, interest payment is semi-annual. So then that means $50 every 6 months, right? $50 every 6 months. Okay, so that's some standardized feature of the bond, and the bonds can be classified as either treasury bond, depending on the issuer, treasury bond or corporate bond or municipal bond. I didn't put municipal bond here. So municipal bond is issued by, first of all, treasury bond is issued by the Treasury Department. Treasury Department is, of course, the federal government, right? Federal government. Municipal bonds state and local governments, right? State government, city governments, right? These are municipal governments, and the corporations, corporate bonds, right? So it can be classified by who issued it. And then it can be classified as short-term and long-term, right? Short-term, the the line between short-term and long-term in finance and accounting is 1 year. Anything, right? You know this already. We talked about, money market and capital market, right? The line between money market and capital market is 1 year, right? Um, so long-term bonds have maturity above 1 year, and in case of Treasury, they have 1 year to 10-year maturity, right? And then 10 years to 30-year maturity, and they have different names. Actually, it's both long-term, but I just 10 to 30 years, I just called it, very long-term, but it's just long-term. And then for short-term Treasury security, right? Short-term Treasury security. The name is, Treasury bill, and the long-term Treasury security with maturity between 1 and 10 years is called Treasury note. The long-term Treasury security with maturity between 10 and 30 years is called Treasury bond. Okay. Now, in case of corporate bond, the short-term corporate bond is called commercial paper. Long-term corporate bond is called bond. Actually, this table can be misleading, because what I'm saying here is the name long-term bond, very long-term. I mean, for corporate bond, very long-term doesn't apply. I mean, corporate bonds can have maturity between 1 year to 30 years, but they don't classify it as, they don't call it by different names. They don't call, they don't distinguish, 1 to 10 years from 10 to 30 years, and then they don't call it by different names. It's just called Treasury. It's called bond for corporations. It's called bond. Okay, so what I'm saying here, not applicable. That means, very long term. That kind of classification is not applicable to corporate bond. In other words, all corporate bonds with longer than 1 year maturities are called corporate bonds. Okay. Only has these three different segmentations, right? So depending on who is the issuer and what is the maturity, it can be classified this way. And also, I told you, the bonds do not sell for face value. I mean, sometimes they can, sometimes, but the face value of the bond, excuse me, not the red one, but face value or maturity value or par value. Which is $1,000, right? But that's not the same thing as selling price of the bond. Okay. Now that piece of B, that means price of the bond. Okay, price of the bond. So that's the market price, selling price. selling price or market price of the bond. I've been telling you, it's not the same thing most of the times. It's not the same thing as the par value. Okay, so in other words, the selling price can be so three possibilities, right? Or can be three possibilities. Okay, that means selling price can be less than the maturity value or par value, or equal. They can be equal, or the market price of the bond can be greater than the par value. Okay, so if it is this, in other words, if the selling price, the market price of the bond is less than the par value, it's called a discount bond because it's selling at discount. And then if this is the case, if the market price is greater than the par value, then it's called a premium bond. Okay, premium bond. And if they are equal, it's called, it's just called par, selling at par. The bond sells at par, right? No particular name. And then depending also, depending on whether it pays. So one more thing, think about it. Bond, as I said, bond is a debt, right? Companies raise capital, debt capital, right? Debt capital. Companies raise debt capital by selling bond. I mean, they can borrow from the bank, but if they can borrow cheaper, right? If they can borrow cheaper from the bond market, they will go to the bond market. And if it is, if they can, because from the stock market or bond market, right? Think about it. You are tapping into a larger pool of investors, so you can raise even a greater amount of debt. You can raise greater amount of capital than just borrowing from a single bank, right? So so basically, if companies sell bonds, then because it is borrowing, they have to pay interest. That's called coupon rate, right? But there are some bonds, normally, they have to pay interest, but there are some bonds that don't pay any interest. You might wonder, then who's going to buy such a bond? I mean, any buyer of the bond is lending money, right? Any buyer of the bond is basically a lender, and a lender would lend only because they get interest, right? But if they don't get any interest, why would they lend money? In that case, think about it. The bond will have to sell at deep discount, right? The bond will have to sell at deep discount. So in other words, in that case is called, if the bond is normally bond is paying interest, so it's called interest bearing bond. And if the bond isn't paying any interest, that's called non-interest bearing. Non-interest bearing. Now, non-interest bearing bond has to be a discount bond, because otherwise, think about it, nobody will buy that bond. In other words, par value of any bond is 1,000, right? And this bond will have to sell at discount, like, $500. Then it only makes sense, because a typical example of interest-bearing, another name is coupon bond, because it pays coupon. Non-interest-bearing bond is called zero coupon. Zero coupon. Coupon means the interest of the bond. Because it's not paying any interest, it's called zero coupon. Actually, a good example of a zero coupon bond is a 30-year zero coupon Treasury. Okay. So, 30-year zero coupon Treasury bond, 30-year zero coupon Treasury bond generally sell at deep discount of like $500 at time zero, only at time zero. Of course, think about it. That means over 30 years, right? At time zero, this is the timeline. 30 years later, right? You pay the price at time zero is 500, and it pays no interest. And 30 years later, it's going to give you 1K. So think about it. During the entire holding period, the holding period return is 100%, right? Holding period return is 100%. I mean, that's the only incentive. I mean, only because it is giving you like 100% holding period return, but that's over 30 years. So if you annualize it, it's going to be like, 2 raised 1 over 30 minus 1. Annually, what should it be? I can do that later, but let's see. But I'm going to do that later. So zero coupon bond has to be a discount bond, right? That's the only way it can sell. On the other hand, coupon bond, it can be either, coupon bond can be either, this can be either premium bond or discount bond. Okay, and depending on whether it pays, if the coupon rate is greater than the prevailing rate in the market. If the coupon rate is greater than the prevailing rate in the market, then it's going to become a premium bond. If the coupon rate is less than the prevailing rate in the market, it's going to become a discount bond. But the zero coupon bond will only have to be a discount bond because there's no other way. Okay, that's another way to classify the bond, whether if it is paying interest or whether it's not paying interest. If it's paying interest, coupon bond. If not, zero coupon bond. And when it is, coupon bond, depending on whether coupon rate is greater than the prevailing rate in the market, or whether it is less than the whether it's vice versa, it becomes premium bond or discount bond. Okay, and if the coupon rate is greater, a premium bond means a bond that sells above par value. Yeah, discount bond is the bond that sells below par value, right? So those are the classifications of the bond. We are almost out of time, so I would like to. I think I will have to stop here. And as I said, this session is being recorded, right? It's so you can find it. You can look it up later. I'm gonna post it in the topic today. We are in topic 1, so it will be posted in the topic 1 folder. Any questions so far? Any questions? Mm-hmm. I have 8 people that are hanging out, tough until the last minute. Any questions? Yeah, can I speak with?
Question.
Yes.
No.
Daniela, actually, do we have office hour today? Do I have office hour? I believe so. So let me first of all, yeah, although we have no, we don't have office hours. So I'll just I'll stay on the I will stay on for a while after everyone leaves. Another thing, the test is still, it's over, but it's still visible. It's still visible until tomorrow. You can check now you can revisit it and review. You can see what you got right and what you got wrong or correct. You will be able to see the correct answers and the feedback. Okay, but that's until tomorrow. All righty. Any other questions? Any other questions? Okay, so if you don't have any, what's going? If you don't have any more questions, then I'll have a great afternoon, great evening, everyone, and I will see you guys on Wednesday. Hopefully Wednesday. I guess Wednesday the rain. Hopefully rain is in forecast, and hopefully I'll get better on Wednesday and see you in person. If not, I will let you know by in the announcement. And so I will see you guys on. I'll stop sharing and see you guys on, and stop recording and see you guys on Wednesday. Okay. All right. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Feel better.
Yeah. Thank you, Melody. Take care now. Okay. I'll stop recording.